Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weekly overlook. You might already have noticed that I am not on the SPC outlooks that I usually am on for weekly overlooks or daily forecasts. That's because I am doing this a day early after I already posted the June 17th, 2023 forecast. This is because I am going on vacation next week and I don't want to have to be bogged down by a weekly overlook and then the forecast for Monday before I leave on Tuesday. So I am going to post today's weekly overlook today, and hopefully I won't have to worry about weather for the rest of the week except for tomorrow's forecast. So first, let's start off with our pivotal weather models and let's look at the triggers for severe weather development for the rest of the week. Basically, for tomorrow, we do have the remnants of that impulse from last week, which are still remaining, as well as the remnants of leftover convection from today that should trigger some severe weather development across Arkansas, Louisiana, parts of Mississippi, and parts of Texas. This is currently issued as an enhanced risk by the SPC for tomorrow for the day 2 outlook. As for after that, the leftover convection should continue eastward across Dixie Valley with whatever's left of that impulse and trigger what is currently issued as a marginal threat for Dixie Valley, I think mostly in Alabama and Georgia and parts of northern Florida. Severe weather on that day should not be too strong, but it is definitely going to be a little bit notable, and it's probably going to stay mostly around a marginal threat to possibly a slight risk. There shouldn't be all that much of a tornado threat, at most possibly at 2%, because you can see that mid-level flow is relatively weak, so wind shear should be relatively weak. But then you can already notice that for the rest of the week, we do have a very strong low-pressure system that is expected to move out of the northeastern parts of the United States and park itself over the northeastern United States, like Washington, Oregon, and parts of Idaho. This should trigger severe weather development with this trough. It shouldn't be too strong depending on our dew points and our instability overall. In this area, moisture is very limited because it's very dry in the eastern parts of the United States, but with whatever moisture, we should possibly see possibly a marginal threat to possibly some slight risks for next week in the Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada region, possibly parts of Colorado, and maybe parts of North Dakota. Depending on terrain and our wind shear, which should be relatively strong, we could possibly see maybe a 2% tornado threat. You might have noticed that the leftover remnants of that little impulse are expected to form a low-pressure system over the southern Dixie Valley states, parts of Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and parts of Florida. This should be a low-pressure system that kind of just parks itself for much of this week. I think going to diminish by Friday. But what this should do is trigger some rain showers, maybe a marginal threat or two in this region, but mostly just trigger some rain showers for much of the southern eastern United States. But then going back to focus on the western United States, we do have some two notable dates that we could possibly see some strong severe weather development that could possibly go up to an enhanced threat, possibly an upper slight risk, but maybe an enhanced risk as well. And those days are most likely going to be Thursday and Saturday. On Thursday, we do have a little bit of ejection that is expected to develop whenever this strong impulse is leaving the United States, right around North Dakota, South Dakota, and parts of Nebraska, maybe parts of northern Kansas. It really all depends. But in this area, we could possibly see some strong development of severe weather because in this area, it is mostly flat. It's not really rocky the further west you go, but it is relatively flat and with strong moisture that should have been pulled up because this trough was mostly negatively tilted. Strong moisture should be pulled north to trigger some strong instability depending on our lapse rates, which could possibly allow for some explosive supercells depending on our wind shear. Now, you can see that mid-level flow is somewhat strong, so some strong wind shear could be in place to warrant maybe a 2%, possibly a 5% on Thursday. And then on Sunday, we do have the return of the subtropical jet. This subtropical jet should trigger some strong severe weather development across Nebraska, South Dakota, parts of Kansas, maybe parts of northern Oklahoma. It really all depends. Maybe parts of North Dakota and South Dakota, but really around the northern reaches of the Midwest. This subtropical jet is more moderate compared to the very strong subtropical jet that we saw this week. It is, again, mostly moderate, so some weaker wind shear could be in place to warrant maybe a 2%, maybe a 5% tornado threat. It really all depends because these models are definitely subject to change by Sunday. So a small tornadic possibility could be possible on Sunday as well as with Thursday. And in this region, we do again have some stronger moisture, which could allow for some stronger instability and overall affect our tornadic possibility, our hail possibility, and our damaging wind threat as well. However, those two regions are not the only place that we could see some severe weather development, more so being in the northwestern United States and mostly just rain showers in the southeastern United States. We could see some severe weather development, maybe not all that strong, but definitely still possible across western Texas and New Mexico. Yes, severe weather development is going to return to the reaches of Texas and New Mexico that just cannot catch a break from strong severe weather development. But when this strong trough is moving through the area, the combination of the subtropical jet and this very strong impulse here is going to allow for the possibility of some severe weather development as that subtropical jet practically passes directly through New Mexico and Texas, and with some strong moisture further out to the east, we could possibly see a dry line or two develop across the Texas Panhandle and trigger severe weather development, as well as maybe the possibility of some lee troughing in the region. Because of overall how weak the subtropical jet could be, a small 2% could be possible, but it doesn't really look all that likely, but it could definitely be possible depending on how the jet stream wants to go. Again, it could be possible, but it might be a little bit unlikely. Now let's take a look at the days where we could see some notable strong severe weather development on Thursday and Saturday, and also take a look at the possibility of some strong severe weather development in western Texas and New Mexico. So you can see, looking at the dew points around western Texas in the New Mexico region, that southeasterly flow from that jet stream should push a little bit on the moisture, again creating the possibility of a few dry lines across the Texas Panhandle, aiding in severe weather development across Texas if the jet stream is relatively weak and may not aid all that much in severe weather development. The strong southeasterly flow could definitely allow for the possibility of some dry lines to trigger severe weather development across the Texas Panhandle into New Mexico. You can see along these dry lines on some days we could possibly see some moisture that does reach the dew points in the 70s, but mostly it's going to stay around dew points in the mid 60s to possibly the upper 60s, depending on lapse rates, which should be relatively strong, and I'll show you that in a second. These dew points could definitely allow for the possibility of some strong instability, possibly up to the 3000s again, like we've been seeing this week. But then let's take a look at the Thursday and Saturday strong severe weather development days for the northern reaches of the Midwest. You can see that we do have some fairly strong instability. Let's go to around Thursday where we have that strong severe weather development. You can see that we have some fairly strong moisture in that region with dew points in the mid to possibly the upper 60s in some regions, mostly in the 60s, in the wide range of 60s, likely going from the low 60s all the way to the upper 60s, depending on lapse rates. We could possibly see some upper moderate instability, maybe the low 3000s, depending on our lapse rates. Taking a look at Sunday, we should have a little bit of the same thing, but maybe even more. We do have some strong dew points that are much more stronger compared to the dew points that were forecasted for Thursday. We do have some dew points that do reach the possibility of the low 70s, but mostly the upper 60s and possibly the mid 60s as well. By the time Sunday does roll around, models are definitely subject to change and may not be as high as they are forecasting, or it could be as high. It really all depends. They definitely are subject to change when Sunday rolls around, but I will not be able to forecast it, so it really all depends. But with strong moisture like this, we could definitely see some strong instability depending on our lapse rates. Then let's take a look at the reaches of the western United States where that very strong trough is expected to move through, where we could possibly see some marginal or slight risks. Again, as you know, moisture is mostly going to be relatively limited in the western reaches of the United States because it is the western reaches of the United States where they have a lot of deserts. So again, moisture is going to be relatively weaker and mostly limited to parts of Montana and Wyoming, maybe parts of Idaho and Oregon, but definitely not parts of Nevada or Utah. They would have to be pulled in from the Pacific Ocean, which they are not. So our marginal threats and slight risks are definitely going to be very limited this week in terms of instability and moisture because of how weak moisture is overall. Taking a look at our lapse rates, let's start off with those 2 days that we could possibly see some strong severe weather development, Thursday and Sunday. You can see going to around Thursday first, you can see that we do have some fairly strong to more moderate lapse rates, mostly in the 6s to possibly the 7s. This is going to allow for the possibility of maybe some more upper moderate to possibly the low 3000s, maybe the mid 3000s, depending on our dew points with lapse rates like this. But then let's move over to Sunday. You can see that we do have some fairly strong lapse rates as well. We do have more moderate lapse rates, but they are still strong enough to warrant the possibility of some upper moderates again, with the possibility of some low 3000s. It really all depends on our dew points and if our models are really going to stick around the way that they are until Sunday. So we could again definitely see the possibility of some strong instability with lapse rates like this, but it really all depends. But then let's take a look at western Texas for now. You can see that we do have some fairly strong lapse rates as well. Very strong lapse rates that should fluctuate between the 7s, the 8s, and possibly the low to mid 9s possibly. Again, it really all depends if our models are going to stick around till then and not change up as much. But again, it could be possible when this time rolls around, but these strong lapse rates are with that strong moisture is definitely going to allow for the possibility of some very strong instability. But then let's take a look further out west. It does look like that stronger lapse rates are mostly going to be isolated to some regions, but then further on in the second half of the week, past Wednesday into Thursday and Friday, we do have some fairly strong lapse rates right around as the time that that trough is expected to leave when strong lapse rates do return. So lapse rates before that are going to be relatively limited and limit our overall instability even more with the fact that we already have limited instability with our limited moisture. Taking a look at our instability, let's start off with the western Texas panhandle into parts of New Mexico area where we could see the possibility of some stronger rounds of severe weather development. We do have some fairly strong instability along those dry lines, mostly in the 3000s, possibly the weak 4000s in some regions. As you can see, maybe in some regions like here along those dry lines, we could definitely see the possibility of some stronger instability, but depending on our wind shear, we may not have all that much of a tornado threat because of the fact that the jet stream is expected to pass mostly over New Mexico and not really get all that close to the Texas area, so wind shear is likely going to be relatively limited for western Texas and maybe only get up to possibly a 2% on some days for tornadoes. But overall, some weaker wind shear could allow for the possibility of some large hail with instability like this, as well as the possibility of some strong outflow gusts. But then let's take a look at the western United States where we have some expected to be limited instability, and we do have some fairly limited instability for the first half of this week. For the first half of the week, instability is going to be very, very limited. Probably not going to get up to the mid 1000s at all. Mostly going to stay around the weak 1000s to possibly the widespread triple digits. They are definitely not going to get up to the 2000s most likely because of limited dew points and limited lapse rates. But then around the time that the trough is expected to leave and lapse rates do move back into the area to warrant the possibility of some stronger instability and stronger dew points, we do have some fairly stronger instability. But again, because of that trough leaving, we may not have all that much of a strong trigger for severe weather development in the returning instability to the region. So overall, severe weather development is again going to be very limited, and tornadoes are possibly going to be very, very unlikely because of very limited instability. However, with some weaker instability in some regions, we could possibly see some small to medium-sized hail as well as some strong damaging outflow gusts. But again, the possibility of tornadoes is going to be fairly low. But then let's take a look at the possibility of our Thursday and Saturday threats. Taking a look at Thursday, we do have some fairly strong instability. It is mostly going to stay in maybe the upper moderates, maybe not the 3000s, mostly going to be in the upper moderates, depending on our wind shear, which is expected to leave the region whenever this rolls around. The possibility of tornadoes is possibly going to stay around the 2% regions from the SPC, definitely not going to get up to a 5%. It's very unlikely that it does that with instability and wind shear that is expected to be like this. But then let's take a look at our Saturday threat. If we go to Sunday, not Saturday, we do have some fairly stronger instability and more widespread instability with Cape values that are expected to reach possibly the 3000s in some regions, but mostly the moderates in the upper moderates. So with some overall possibility of some weak wind shear, we could possibly see a 2% tornado threat, maybe a 5% in some very small regions, but it may not be all that likely because of how weak the subtropical jet is expected to be around this time. It could be possible, but it seems overall unlikely, mostly going to get up to the possibility of a 2% tornado threat, probably not get any higher. But with instability like this on both Thursday and Sunday, we could possibly see some large hail as well as the possibility of some strong damaging outflow gusts. Now let's take a look at our wind shear and the possibility of our tornado threats for this week. Let's start off with the Texas region, where we could see those stronger storms to develop across western Texas and New Mexico. Again, we do have some fairly weaker wind shear because of the subtropical jet passing a little bit across New Mexico instead of the region where it is expected to have the possibility of some stronger severe weather development. It's clearly missing it, so wind shear that could be sufficient enough for some tornadic development across the western Texas region is going to be very unlikely and possibly not even get up to a 2% on some days. However, it does look like maybe on Wednesday we could see a little bit of some weak wind shear across western Oklahoma and southwestern Kansas that could allow for the possibility of a 2% tornado threat. But then let's take a look at the Thursday and Sunday threats. You can already see with that trough that is moving through the area, we have some extremely strong wind shear, but because of the fact that Cape is very, very, very limited and overall terrain is very, very mountainous, tornadic development in this region is going to be very, very, very unlikely to very slim and possibly not even happen. But then actually taking a look at the Thursday and Sunday threats, let's go around to the Thursday threat where we can see a little bit of ejection from that trough that is leaving. It does look like we do have some weaker shear that does develop behind the line of storms and not really strong shear ahead of that line. However, this could allow for the possibility of a 2% tornado threat depending on our Cape values, but because of how weak wind shear is ahead of this line, tornadoes are probably going to be pretty unlikely with this Thursday threat. But then let's go all the way to the Sunday threat, where we do have the possibility of some weaker wind shear. We do have some fairly weak wind shear in the area that could affect the possibility of a 2% tornado threat, probably not get up to a 5% because of how overall weak wind shear is, but it could definitely allow for the possibility of a 2% tornado threat on Sunday. But again, overall, the possibility of tornadoes for this week is going to be overall pretty weak. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator. Join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator, and hopefully I might be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast. I'm not really too sure if there will be a forecast tomorrow, depending on the time that I fly out.